Sugar, you've been preaching water while drinking wine for so long, you've forgotten what honesty even tastes like. Senator John Kennedy's words hung in the air of the Senate committee room, like smoke from a distant fire. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who just moments before had been lecturing the 71-year-old Louisiana senator about being a fossil who needed to step aside for people who actually get the future, sat frozen in her designer chair, her perfectly contoured face starting to crack. The Senate Committee on Government Ethics and Oversight was supposed to be reviewing the impact of social media on democracy. Instead, it became the stage for the most devastating political takedown in modern American history. At exactly 2:47 p.m., on a humid Tuesday afternoon, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez strolled into the committee room wearing her signature red lipstick and a designer pantsuit that cost more than what most Americans make in 2 months. She had no idea she was walking into her own political funeral. Across the table sat Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, adjusting his glasses with the careful precision of a man who'd spent decades letting Harvard lawyers underestimate him. His gentle smile and rumpled appearance hid a mind sharper than a surgical scalpel. "Senator Kennedy," AOC began, her voice dripping with millennial condescension. "Maybe it's time fossils like you step aside for people who actually understand the future. Your backwards Louisiana views have no place in modern America." The room fell silent. The cameras rolled. Twitter was already on fire with hashtags like AOC destroys Kennedy. But Kennedy's smile never wavered. He simply reached for a series of colored folders arranged before him like ammunition. When he spoke, his Louisiana drawl was as thick as molasses and twice as sweet. "Well, bless your heart, Representative. You know, in Louisiana, we have a saying, the loudest cricket is usually the first one to get eaten." What happened next would destroy not just a political career, but an entire mythology. Because John Kennedy didn't come to play, he came to reveal the truth. And the truth, delivered in a southern drawl with a grandfather's patience, would prove more devastating than any shouted accusation. The young socialist from New York was about to learn what happens when you mock a Rhodes Scholar who chooses to talk like a country lawyer. She was about to discover that sometimes the slowest draw hides the quickest wit, and that, in politics, just like in alligator hunting, the one who stays the calmest usually wins. By the time this hearing ended, Champagne Socialist would be trending worldwide. AOC would be hyperventilating on live television, and Senator Kennedy would deliver a single line that would echo through American politics for generations. But first, he had to open those folders. And Lord have mercy, what was inside those folders would change everything. Senator Kennedy leaned back in his chair with the unhurried confidence of a man who'd waited 71 years for moments just like this. His fingers drummed slowly on the red folder before him, a color choice that would prove to be ironically appropriate. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez," he began, his voice carrying that musical Louisiana cadence. "Before we discuss my fossilized views, I wonder if we might talk about something more contemporary, like that beautiful dress you wore to the Met Gala." AOC's eyes flashed with triumph. Here it was, another old white man about to criticize her for attending a cultural event. She'd destroyed dozens of Republicans with this exact trap. "Of course you'd bring that up, Senator," she fired back, leaning into her microphone. "I wore 'Tax the Rich' on that dress as a political statement. Unlike you, I actually stand for something." Kennedy's smile widened just a fraction. "Oh, I remember that dress. It was a beautiful piece. Aurora James designed it, didn't she? Lovely work." "Yes. And well, I may be just a simple country lawyer, but I did a little research. Kennedy opened the red folder with deliberate slowness. That dress, according to the designer's own Instagram, young people still use that, right? That dress was valued at $35,000. A murmur went through the room. AOC's perfectly contoured face showed the first crack of concern. It was borrowed. Oh, I know it was borrowed, Cher. Just like that $30,000 ticket to the event was borrowed. Just like that limousine was borrowed. And just like those $995 Yves Saint Laurent shoes were borrowed. Kennedy's drawl seemed to get thicker with each word. Seems like you do an awful lot of borrowing from rich folks for someone who wants to tax them out of existence. He pulled out a photograph of AOC at the Met Gala after-party, champagne glass in hand, laughing with tech billionaires. This here's my favorite part, Kennedy continued. See that gentleman you're hugging? That's Michael Bloomberg. His net worth is $82 billion. And that lady on your left? That's Laurene Powell Jobs. He's worth a cool $21 billion. That guy buying you champagne over there? He's a hedge fund manager who got rich by shorting working-class mortgages. You could see AOC's throat move as she swallowed hard. Those conversations were about, oh, I know exactly what they were about. Kennedy then produced a document. This, he said, is a donation record from your campaign showing that just 3 days after the Met Gala, some mysterious donations started pouring in. There was $50,000 from an LLC registered in Delaware, and another $75,000 from a foundation that traces back to, well, would you look at that? The very same hedge fund manager from the party. The sound of camera shutters clicking filled the sudden silence. On C-SPAN, viewers at home watched as AOC's confident smirk melted into something that looked a lot like panic. But here's what really chaps my hide, Kennedy said, his voice suddenly taking on a sharp edge. While you were sipping champagne in a dress that cost more than a teacher's yearly salary, your own district in Queens had the highest unemployment rate in all of New York. Did you know that, darling? He then pulled out another document. Maria Santos, a single mother of 3 from your district, lost her job during COVID and applied for assistance. And do you know what your office told her? They said resources were limited, but somehow there were enough resources for a $35,000 dress just to make a statement. AOC tried to jump in and respond. That's completely different. Is it? Kennedy's voice became soft now, almost dangerous in its gentleness. Because, you see, I've got Ms. Santos waiting right outside. Would you like to explain to her how a borrowed dress helps her feed her kids? The entire committee room had gone dead silent, except for the sound of AOC's breathing, which was now noticeably quicker. You know what we call it back in Louisiana when someone preaches about helping the poor while they're partying with billionaires? Kennedy asked. We call that Sunday service at a casino. There's a whole lot of praying, but the house always wins. He then closed the red folder gently. That's just folder number 1, Representative. We've got 6 more of these to go. AOC's chief of staff was frantically typing away on her phone. Her communications director had gone completely pale. The hashtag Champagne Socialist had already started trending online. Kennedy adjusted his glasses and cracked that grandfatherly smile that had fooled so many of his opponents over the years. Now, Sugar, you were saying something about fossils? Because, from where I'm sitting, the only thing that looks fossilized here is your integrity. But don't you worry. We're just getting started. He reached for the green folder, and AOC's hands visibly trembled as she fumbled for her water glass. The old Southern gentleman had set his trap, and the young revolutionary had walked right into it. The feeding frenzy had begun. Kennedy opened the green folder with the slow, careful precision of a surgeon preparing to operate. The choice of color was deliberate, just as deliberate as everything the old Louisiana fox did. "Now, Representative," he began, his voice now carrying a note of grandfatherly disappointment. "Let's talk about saving the planet. That's your signature issue, isn't it? The Green New Deal." AOC straightened up, trying to find her footing again. After all, climate change was her territory. "Yes, and unlike your generation, Senator, we actually care about carbon footprints," Kennedy interrupted gently. "Because I happen to have yours right here." He pulled out a spreadsheet that was lit up like a Christmas tree. There were red numbers everywhere. "In the last 12 months, you've taken 200 rides, and not on public transportation, mind you. We're talking about private cars." He adjusted his glasses, peering over them. "Your average ride was 14 miles. For a total of 23,000 pounds of CO2 emissions." AOC's face began to flush. "The nature of my work requires—" "Oh, I understand completely." Kennedy nodded sympathetically. "That's why you took a private jet to the climate conference in Copenhagen. And the one to Davos. And the one to— where was it? Oh, yes, Coachella. Very important climate work happens at Coachella, I'm sure." He then produced flight records with the methodical patience of a seasoned prosecutor. "These private flights produced more carbon in 6 months than the average American family does in 10 years. But I'm sure you carbon offset them." Silence. "No? Well, maybe you were just too busy." Kennedy pulled out a printout from Instagram. "This is you at a climate protest last month. It's a beautiful sign. There is no planet B. Very moving." He then pulled out another photo. "And this is you leaving that exact same protest in a black Suburban. Not even a hybrid, sugar, a full, gas-guzzling Suburban. Your assistant posted it by accident before quickly deleting it. But the internet, well, the internet is forever." The committee room was buzzing now. Reporters were live tweeting every single revelation. "But here's my personal favorite," Kennedy continued, producing a video still. "This is from your own documentary about climate change. Remember the scene where you're riding the subway to show how we all need to use public transport?" AOC gave a weary nod. "Well, your camera crew, God bless them, they kept the cameras rolling after the scene ended." He pressed play on a tablet. The video showed AOC instantly leaving the subway car, complaining about a smell, then hopping into a waiting SUV. "That smell you were just complaining about?" Kennedy asked quietly. "That's the smell working folks have to deal with every single day, while you preach at them from the back of your Uber." He then pulled out another document. "These are your travel coordinator's emails. Let me just read this one out loud. AOC refuses to fly commercial. Book NetJets for all travel over 200 miles. That's a pretty interesting take on leadership for climate change." But Kennedy was far from finished. He then produced a utility bill. "This one's from your D.C. apartment, not your place in New York. And that's a whole different story. Your monthly electric bill totaled 3,007 hours. The average for an apartment that size is just $89. That's supposed to be private, but not when you're telling Americans to use candles instead of light bulbs. It just ain't." Kennedy's voice grew harder. "You have a heated rooftop pool, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. In December, while you were telling families to turn down their thermostats." He trailed off, pulling out a photograph that made the entire room gasp. "This is from security footage at Whole Foods. A $1,700 grocery bill. Wagyu beef, imported water from Fiji. Out-of-season fruit flown all the way from New Zealand. That is one hell of a carbon footprint for someone who tweets about eating sustainably. AOC's hands were now shaking. This is a total violation of my privacy. Privacy? Kennedy let out a laugh as dry as August in Baton Rouge. You gave that up the moment you started Instagram living from your kitchen, telling people to go vegan while you had a freezer packed with meat right behind you. He then pulled out a financial disclosure form. Now, let's talk about your investments. You've got $174,000 invested in oil and gas stocks. Exxon, Chevron, BP, the whole destroy the planet portfolio. Those were automatic. Automatic, like your automatic opposition to nuclear power, the cleanest energy we have, or your automatic support for shutting down pipelines that then required oil to be moved by truck, increasing emissions. Kennedy leaned forward in his chair. Do you realize your carbon footprint is 7 times higher than the average American's? You produce more carbon in a single month than a Louisiana fishing family does in 5 years. He then pulled one final item from the green folder. A petition. This is signed by 200 environmental activists, right from your own district. They're asking you to stop using their cause for photo ops while you're living like a Saudi prince. The killing blow was about to land. Kennedy's voice dropped to just above a whisper. And you know what the saddest part of all this is? There are young people out there who are genuinely trying to save the planet. They're taking the bus, growing their own food, and making real, actual sacrifices. And then we have you, preaching water while you drink wine, flying private while you tweet about going public, living like Marie Antoinette while you cosplay as Joan of Arc. He slowly closed the green folder. Down in Louisiana, we have a saying for that. We call it environmental blackface. You're wearing the cause like it's a costume, all while making a mockery of the people who actually believe in it. Green New Deal. Green New Grift was trending worldwide. AOC's environmental coalition was already putting out statements to distance themselves from her. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, but Kennedy was already reaching for the yellow folder. Now, sugar, he said, a dangerous smile on his face. Let's talk about where all that jet fuel money really came from. Because campaign finance fraud? Well, that's where things get really interesting. The yellow folder almost seemed to glow under the committee room lights. Kennedy opened it with the same reverence a preacher opens a Bible, if that Bible happened to contain evidence of federal crimes. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, Kennedy began, his drawl stretching her name out into a musical accusation. You've built up quite a reputation for yourself as a champion of campaign finance reform, getting money out of politics, transparency, all that good stuff. AOC's jaw clenched. She could see the trap being laid, but there was no way to avoid it. So, you can imagine my surprise, Kennedy continued, producing a Federal Election Commission report. When I found out you've been running what we like to call down in Louisiana, a political crawfish boil. Lots of shells, and you can't tell what's really inside until you crack 'em all open. He laid out the documents like a card dealer revealing a winning hand. Let's start with your Chief of Staff's consulting firm, Brand New Congress LLC. It's a clever name. You paid them $1.7 million from campaign funds. Now, on the surface, that's perfectly legal. Legal as a fox in a henhouse, perhaps. A smile played on Kennedy's lips. You see, that money was then funneled to another company, also controlled by your Chief of Staff, then to another, and another, just like a shell game at a carnival. Except this carnival is Congress, and the shells are all LLCs. He then pulled out the bank records. By the time we followed the money, and Lord, did it take some following, about $900,000 of it had found its way into personal accounts, including $27,000 that went directly to your live-in boyfriend for consulting services. Gasps rippled through the room. Now, I'm just a simple country lawyer, Kennedy continued. But where I come from, paying your boyfriend with campaign funds is like tipping yourself at your own restaurant. It just ain't done. He produced more documents. Here's where it gets spicier than jambalaya. Your campaign reported paying $15,000 for event catering. The caterer says they only received $3,000. Where'd the other $12,000 go? Kennedy answered his own question. Right into a Venmo account belonging to your assistant, who then Venmo'd it to you with the note. And I'm quoting here, for the Gucci Fund. Now, I don't know much about fashion, but I don't think Gucci makes campaign buttons. AOC's face had gone from red to white. Her chief of staff was frantically whispering to her lawyer. But wait, there's more, Kennedy said, channeling his inner game show host. Remember those small dollar donations you're so proud of? Those $27 contributions from regular folks. He pulled out an analysis. Funny thing, when we trace the credit cards, about 40% of them don't exist. Fake names, fake addresses, but real money. Money that traced back to 3 union PACs who broke up large donations into small chunks. That's called smurfing. In the financial crime world, it's also called a felony. The evidence just kept coming. Here's $200,000 in community outreach that went to a company registered to your second cousin. The company's address? A vacant lot in the Bronx. It's hard to do community outreach from an empty lot, but I suppose anything's possible. Kennedy pulled out a photograph. This is you at a campaign strategy meeting in Miami. Funny location for a New York campaign. Even funnier, it was during Art Basel. And that's a $4,000 a night hotel on campaign funds. We were meeting with donors at Club 11, even at 3:00 a.m. Kennedy produced receipts. $7,000 in bottle service charged to volunteer appreciation. Must have been some mighty appreciated volunteers. But the real bombshell was still coming. Kennedy pulled out a sealed envelope marked Department of Justice. This arrived at my office yesterday. It's a target letter informing me that your campaign is under federal investigation for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. AOC stood up abruptly. This is a witch hunt. Sit down, Kennedy said firmly. We're not done yet. He pulled out the most damaging evidence of all. Text messages between AOC and her chief of staff. These were provided by a whistleblower from your own campaign. Let me read. We need to move another $50K through the LLC. Make it look like media buys. And your response? Just make sure it can't be traced. I need a new place in D.C. The texts got worse. There were discussions of destroying evidence, coaching witnesses, and hiding money transfers. Each message was dated and fully authenticated. You know what the real tragedy is? Kennedy's voice was almost sad. You ran as the working-class hero, the bartender who'd change Washington. But you've been stealing from the very people who believed in you. $5 donations from minimum wage workers were funding your champagne lifestyle. He pulled out one last document. This is from Margot Williams, a retiree from your district. She donated $500 from her Social Security checks because she believed in you. That money went to pay for your boyfriend's PlayStation and your trip to Miami. How do you think Ms. Williams feels about that? The committee room was in chaos. AO's finance fraud was trending. Several Democratic committee members were physically distancing themselves from AOC. Kennedy closed the yellow folder. In Louisiana, we say a politician is like a catfish, bottom-feeding and full of mud. But at least a catfish is honest about what it is. AOC was hyperventilating now. Her carefully applied makeup was running. The socialist superhero was melting under the southern sun of truth. 3 folders down, Kennedy said quietly, reaching for the blue one. 4 to go. And sugar? We're just getting to the good parts. The blue folder landed on the desk with a thud that seemed to echo through AOC's chest. Kennedy's weathered hands of Shapiro opened it slowly, revealing photographs that would haunt her political career forever. "Now, Representative," Kennedy began, his voice taking on the tone of a disappointed grandfather. "Let's talk about your abuela, your grandmother down in Puerto Rico. Remember her?" AOC's face went rigid. This was sacred ground. Family was supposed to be off-limits. "Oh, don't look at me like I just kicked your dog," Kennedy continued. "You're the one who made her famous. You put her all over Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, made her a symbol of Puerto Rican suffering." He pulled out some printed tweets, and in his slow drawl he read, "My abuela's house still has damage from Hurricane Maria. Trump abandoned Puerto Rico." That tweet racked up 2.8 million likes. It made you a hero. Then Kennedy produced some photographs. "This is your grandmother's house. The roof damage, the water stains, the mold. Heartbreaking stuff. No one should have to live like that." AOC shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She knew something bad was coming. "So when Matt Walsh, and he's not my favorite person, but even a broken clock is right twice a day, raised $14,000 to fix your grandmother's house. You know what you did?" Silence. "You refused it, sent it back, and said you didn't want charity." Kennedy's voice hardened. "Your grandmother is living with a damaged roof, yet you turned down $100,000 because accepting it would make you look bad." He then pulled out bank statements. "But here's the really interesting part. Your campaign raised $2.7 million for Puerto Rico relief, right after you posted about your grandmother. Want to know how much of that actually made it to Puerto Rico?" The pause that followed was excruciating. 0. Not a single peso. Not 1 penny. Kennedy laid out the financial records on the table. That money went to administrative costs, consulting fees, and so-called awareness campaigns. And you know what awareness campaigns are, don't you? That's you, flying first class to Puerto Rico for a few photo ops. The committee room was dead silent. Even her fellow Democrats looked uncomfortable. "But it gets worse," Kennedy continued, pulling out a video tablet. "This is from Univision in Puerto Rico. They interviewed your grandmother." He pressed play. An elderly woman appeared on the screen, speaking in Spanish, with English subtitles below. "I don't understand why Alexandria uses my problems for her politics. I told her not to put my house on the internet. She never visits, only when there are cameras." AOC's hands flew up to cover her face. The reporter then asks her about the fundraising. Kennedy narrated for the committee, "Your grandmother says," and I quote, "What money? I haven't seen any money. My roof still leaks." He pulled out even more documents. "Remember when Trump offered $13 billion in aid to Puerto Rico, and you led the charge to reject it? You said it came with too many strings attached." Well, turns out, those strings were accountability measures meant to prevent corruption. You know, the exact kind of corruption where relief money just disappears into consulting fees. Kennedy then produced a letter. "This one is from the mayor of Aguadilla, your grandmother's own town. He writes that AOC used our suffering for her political gain, all while blocking actual aid. She is not welcome here." But the most devastating piece of evidence was still yet to come. Kennedy pulled out a contract. This is an agreement between your campaign and a media company for a documentary about the suffering in Puerto Rico. Your fee, as executive producer, was $275,000. Your grandmother's roof repair, by the way, would have only cost about $30,000. You claimed that documentary was to raise awareness. Awareness? Kennedy's voice cracked like a whip. Son, everyone's aware that hurricanes are bad. What they needed were hammers and nails, not more of your Instagram posts. He pulled out a photograph that made several people in the room audibly gasp. This is you at the Four Seasons in San Juan during your so-called relief trip. That's a $1,200 a night suite. You posted photos of yourself helping out during the day and then spent your nights at a resort that costs more than what most Puerto Ricans make in a month. Kennedy leaned forward in his chair. You know what really chaps my Louisiana hide. My state gets hurricanes, too. When Katrina hit us, you know what we didn't do? We didn't use our own grandmothers as props. We fixed their damn roofs. He pulled out one final document. This is a petition signed by 500 Puerto Rican families asking you to please stop using their tragedy for your political career. They call you La Vendida, the sellout. But the most devastating part came when Kennedy's voice suddenly grew quiet. Your grandmother is 78 years old. She raised you when your own daddy wasn't around. She cleaned houses so that you could have a better life. And in return, you turned her into a Twitter prop, all while refusing the very help that would have fixed her home. He produced one last photograph. This was taken just last week. Your grandmother's house still has a tarp for a roof. But this, he said, holding up another photo, this is your brand new Tesla, which cost $97,000. That's 3 new roofs for your abuela. But I guess some things are just more important than family. You could feel the disgust hanging thick in the committee room. At this point, even AOC's allies couldn't find a way to defend her. Kennedy slowly closed the blue folder. In Louisiana, we have a saying, you can judge a person by how they treat their own grandmother. Well, sugar, the judgment's in, and it ain't pretty. AOC was slumped down in her chair now, her designer blazer wrinkled, her perfect image crumbling just like her grandmother's ceiling. 4 down, Kennedy said, reaching for a purple folder. 3 to go. Now let's talk about the 25,000 jobs you killed in Queens, because that's where this story gets really ugly. The purple folder felt heavier than the rest, weighted with the broken dreams of 25,000 families. Kennedy opened it with the solemnity of a man about to read a casualty list. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, he began, let's discuss your greatest victory, chasing Amazon out of New York. You celebrated on Twitter, calling it a win for the working class. Remember? AOC straightened up slightly, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. We stopped corporate welfare. You stopped 25,000 jobs, Kennedy interrupted, his voice as sharp as a bayou knife. Right in your own district, in one of the poorest parts of New York. But let's walk through this nice and slow, like explaining algebra to a mule. He pulled out a stack of economic impact studies. Amazon was planning to bring a second headquarters to Long Island City. The average salary was projected to be $150,000 a year. There were jobs for everyone, from janitors to engineers. This was the kind of opportunity that completely transforms a community. Kennedy then produced a map. This right here is your district. It has a 21% unemployment rate among young adults. The median income is just $44,000. Amazon would have doubled that, practically overnight. They wanted $3 billion in tax breaks, she retorted. They weren't paying their fair share. And that's where you're either lying or you just can't do the math, Kennedy shot back. Kennedy's patience was clearly wearing thin. Those weren't cash handouts, he explained. They were tax credits on taxes Amazon would already be paying. If Amazon pays $10 billion in taxes, they get $3 billion back. That still leaves New York with $7 billion it didn't have before. That is not corporate welfare. That's called an investment. He then pulled out a video tablet. This clip is from the victory party after Amazon pulled out. And that's you, popping champagne. Now, while you were celebrating, let me show you what was actually happening back in Queens. The video switched to a scene at a local community center. A middle-aged Latino man was in tears. My son just graduated with a degree in computer science. This job would have changed our family's lives. Now, he's applying for jobs at Target. Then, another clip played. This time, it was a black woman in her 50s. I've been cleaning offices for 30 years. Amazon would have needed hundreds of cleaners, paying $25 an hour, plus benefits. Now, I'm still stuck making $15 an hour with no health care. Kennedy's voice grew heavy. Those are your constituents. You chose champagne over their children's futures. But the evidence was about to get even more damning. Kennedy produced a set of delivery logs. Here's an interesting thing about your so-called Amazon boycott. These are the delivery records for your DC office. 2,847 Amazon packages in the last year alone. That includes everything from office supplies to that $400 espresso machine. Next, he pulled out credit card statements. Your personal Amazon Prime account shows $78,000 in purchases since you defeated them. That even includes the very device you used to tweet your victory from, which was bought on Amazon. That's different. About as different as a fox in a henhouse, Kennedy retorted. Kennedy produced yet more documents. Now this one, he said, is really special. These are internal emails from Amazon that were released during a lawsuit. They show that after you chased them out of New York, Amazon built the exact same facility down in Virginia. Same jobs, same everything. The only difference is that those 25,000 jobs went to Virginia instead of your district. He then pulled out unemployment statistics. Long Island City now has the highest youth unemployment rate in all of New York. Local businesses that renovated, expecting a flood of Amazon customers, went bankrupt. That Puerto Rican family that invested their life savings into a food truck for the Amazon campus. They lost everything. Kennedy then held up a petition. This is signed by 15,000 Queens residents asking you to apologize and try to bring Amazon back. And your response? You blocked every single one of them on Twitter. But the worst part was still to come. Kennedy pulled out a folder of letters from unions. These are from labor unions, your supposed base. Construction workers, electricians, plumbers, all of them furious because you cost them thousands of union jobs. The Teamsters alone would have gained 2,000 new positions. He read from one of the letters. AOC claims to support workers, but she killed the single best opportunity we've had in decades. She doesn't speak for us. She speaks only for herself. Then, Kennedy pulled out a photograph that silenced the entire room. This is Carlos Mendez, a single father, and one of your constituents. He was slated to be a security supervisor at Amazon, which would have tripled his income. After you killed the deal, he could no longer afford his daughter's asthma medication. She's in the hospital right now. AOC's face had turned a sickly gray. But here's the real kicker, Kennedy continued. And while you were killing jobs for the working class, that next facility Jeff Bezos wanted to build just went to Arlington, Virginia. A place, by the way, represented by Democrats who actually understand economics. He pulled out one final, damning piece of evidence. This is an internal memo from your own staff, leaked by someone who clearly has a conscience. In it, you write, "We need to kill this Amazon deal. It makes us look bad if capitalism actually ends up helping workers. It's better that they stay poor and keep voting for us than for them to get rich and stop needing us." The committee room erupted. That single memo was political suicide. Kennedy's voice dripped with pure disgust. You deliberately kept people in poverty. You denied them opportunities just to uphold your narrative. Down in Louisiana, we've got a word for that. We call it pure evil. He snapped the purple folder shut. You threw parties while families couldn't afford to eat. You were popping champagne while people's dreams were dying. You were tweeting about victory while your own constituents were lining up for food stamps. And it was all because you cared more about your socialist brand than you did about their actual lives. By now, AOC was in tears, her makeup streaking down her face. But Kennedy was far from finished. 2 more folders, he announced, reaching for the orange one. Let's dive into how a bartender became a millionaire while preaching about income inequality. Because, honey, this is where your socialism conveniently runs into Swiss bank accounts. The orange folder seemed to glow like a sunset, or maybe more accurately, like the fiery end of a political career. Kennedy opened it with the slow patience of a man savoring a fine wine, if that wine had been aged in a barrel of hypocrisy. Now, Kennedy began, adjusting his glasses, let's talk about income inequality. That's your signature issue, isn't it? The socialist bartender who fights for economic justice. He pulled out a financial disclosure form. It says here, he noted, your net worth when you first entered Congress was just $15,000. Modest, relatable, the kind of story that really sells. Then, Kennedy produced some updated documents. And this is your current net worth, $2.1 million. That's quite a return on your investment for just 3 years of public service. Even Bernie Madoff would be impressed. AOC tried to interrupt, but Kennedy simply raised a hand to silence her. Let me walk you through this like I'm explaining it to my own grandkids. Your congressional salary is $174,000 a year. After taxes, that's maybe $120,000. Over 3 years, that comes to $360,000 total. But somehow you've accumulated $2.1 million. He laid out bank statements like a poker dealer spreading a winning hand. Let's start with the book deals. The Green New Deal, an $850,000 advance. Sales figures show it only sold 11,000 copies. That means you were paid $70 per book. Stephen King doesn't even make that much. Sure, book advances are standard, about as standard as a $3 bill. Kennedy then pulled out more contracts. Your second book, Tax the Rich, somehow landed a $1.2 million advance. And it hasn't even been written yet. Publishers usually want to actually see a manuscript before forking over 7 figures, unless, of course, they're paying for something else entirely. Next, he produced records of her speaking engagements. $125,000 from Harvard University for a 30-minute speech on income inequality. That's over $4,000 a minute to tell a room full of rich kids that being rich is bad. The irony is thicker than Louisiana humidity. Kennedy then pulled out property records. Now, this is interesting. You bought a $1.2 million apartment in D.C. with a cash purchase, no mortgage. Where does a former bartender get $1.2 million in cash? More documents seem to appear out of nowhere. Oh, but here it is. A wire transfer from a consulting firm that traces right back to, surprise, surprise, the very same unions funneling money through your campaign. Seems like they're good at spreading the wealth around, just not to their own members. But my personal favorite, Kennedy said with a grin, is your investment portfolio. The very woman who wants to tax the rich out of existence has $400,000 in the stock market. Not in sustainable green energy companies, mind you, not in worker cooperatives, but in Apple, Google, and Microsoft, the same tech giants you constantly rail against. He then produced her trading records. You bought $50,000 in Amazon stock, the very same Amazon you chased out of Queens. And you bought it right after they announced their move to Virginia. Where I come from, that's called insider trading. AOC's lawyer was now whispering frantically in her ear. Now, let's talk about your lifestyle, Kennedy continued, pulling out credit card statements. Whole Foods bills averaging $2,000 a month. That's more than most of your constituents make. Restaurant bills totaling $8,000 monthly. That's a whole lot of avocado toast. He produced a handful of receipts. Bergdorf Goodman, Saks, Neiman Marcus. Designer clothes totaling $147,000 in the last year alone. That is 3 times the median income in your entire district. But I'm sure those Balenciaga shoes really help you connect with the working class. Kennedy pulled out yet more records, this time for travel. First-class flights to everywhere, stays in 5-star hotels. A socialist who stays at the Ritz-Carlton is like a vegan who owns a steakhouse. It just doesn't add up. But here's the thing that really gets me. Kennedy's voice suddenly hardened. While you're out there living like a Kardashian, your own constituents are suffering. They have the highest poverty rate in New York. Families are being forced to choose between paying rent and buying food. And meanwhile, you're spending their entire annual income on handbags. He then produced a particularly damaging photograph. This is a photo of you at a $35,000 per plate fundraiser on Martha's Vineyard. This was taken the very same night you tweeted about obscene wealth. You were literally eating caviar while at the same time tweeting about income inequality. Finally, Kennedy pulled out her tax returns. You paid $42,000 in taxes last year. Your effective tax rate is 6%, the same rate you call criminal when billionaires have it. But I guess tax avoidance is only a bad thing when Republicans are the ones doing it. The final blow was about to land. Kennedy then produced a document clearly marked Panama Papers. It was from your financial advisor. Yes, apparently socialists have those now, and he set up an offshore account for you in the Cayman Islands. There's $400,000 sitting pretty in it, avoiding the very same taxes you want to raise on everybody else. AOC was sobbing by this point, her revolutionary facade completely shattered. You know what the saddest part of all this is? Kennedy's voice became almost gentle. There are real socialists out there, people who actually live by their values, share their wealth, and fight for the workers. And then there's you, a champagne socialist who makes Bernie Sanders look like Karl Marx by comparison. He pulled out one last item, a photograph taken in her district. This is the line at the food bank in Queens just last week, only 2 blocks away from your $1 million apartment. These people believed in you, they voted for you, they trusted you, and you got rich off their suffering. Kennedy then closed the orange folder. Down in Louisiana, we have a saying, you can't be a prophet and a profiteer, but somehow you've managed to be both, preaching poverty while practicing greed. He then reached for the final folder, which was blood red. "One more round, sugar. Let's talk about the people who died because of your policies. Because this isn't just about money anymore. This is about the blood on your hands." That blood-red folder sat on the desk like a silent accusation. Kennedy stared at it for a long moment before opening it, as if the sheer weight of its contents required a moment of silent prayer. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez," he began, his voice now completely stripped of its folksy charm, instead carrying the gravity of a judge pronouncing a sentence. "Everything we've discussed today, the greed, the lies, the betrayals, all of it pales in comparison to what's inside this folder." He opened it slowly, revealing crime scene photographs that made several members of the committee immediately look away. "This is Maria Rodriguez, 34 years old, a mother of 3, who was killed by an illegal immigrant that had been arrested 5 times in your district and released each and every time because of your sanctuary city policies." AOC's face went completely white. "That's not... This is Jamal Washington, 17 years old. He was shot dead with a gun that came through the very border you refused to secure. His mother begged your office for help with the local gang violence. Your staff told her to just attend a protest instead." Kennedy's voice remained steady and relentless. "This is Sophie Chen, a 22-year-old NYU student, who was raped and murdered by someone who should have been deported 3 years earlier but wasn't, because of legislation that you championed." Each photograph landed like a punch to the gut. Each name was another weight on AOC's shoulders. "But it's not just the crime," Kennedy continued. "This is David Martinez, 28 years old, who died of a fentanyl overdose. The drugs that killed him came right through the open border that you celebrate. He left behind a pregnant wife and a 2-year-old son." He then pulled out a thick stack of papers. "I have 847 names right here. These are people in your district who died because of the policies you promoted. Every single one of them had a family. Every single one of them had dreams. And every single one of them is dead because you prioritized your politics over people's lives." Kennedy then produced a set of medical records. "These are from Elmhurst Hospital in your district. They ran out of beds during COVID, you remember that, right? But what you might not know is that they were also treating hundreds of illegal immigrants who came here sick, taking up beds from tax-paying citizens who ended up dying in the hallways." He pulled out a particularly heartbreaking case file. "Rosa Gonzalez, 67, a legal immigrant from Ecuador, who worked her entire life as a nurse's aide. She couldn't get a hospital bed because they were full of people you personally invited here illegally. She died in the hospital parking lot. Her last words were her asking why the citizens didn't come first." AOC was hyperventilating at this point, but Kennedy showed absolutely no mercy. "Let's talk about defund the police," he continued. "Crime in your district is up 400%. This is Officer Michael O'Brien, a father of 4. He was shot while responding to a domestic violence call with no backup, all because you helped cut the police budget. His widow wants to know if you'll be the one to explain to his kids why their daddy's not coming home." Kennedy then pulled out a page of suicide statistics. "Teen suicide in your district has tripled. When parents begged for mental health resources, you were too busy with photo ops." This is Emma Thompson, 14 years old, a straight-A student who killed herself after writing in her diary that the world you described, one with no future and no hope, wasn't worth living in. The committee room was completely silent, except for the sound of AOC's labored breathing. "But here's the worst part," Kennedy said, pulling out one final document. "This is a recording from your staff meeting last month. It seems someone with a conscience decided to record it." He then played the audio. AOC's voice came through, clear and cold. I don't care about the crime statistics. Dead kids make for better campaign ads than safe streets do. We need the victims to sell the revolution. The room absolutely erupted. Even Democrats were on their feet, shouting and demanding AOC's resignation. Kennedy, at 71 years old, stood up slowly, his face radiating pure disgust. "Young lady," he began, "I've been in politics longer than you've been alive. I've seen corruption, I've seen greed, and I've seen stupidity, but I have never seen evil quite like this." He started gathering his folders. "You called me a fossil," he reminded her. "Said I should step aside. Well, this fossil just exposed you for what you really are. A monster who got rich off the graves of the very people you swore to serve." AOC tried to get up, but just collapsed back into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Her staff had already abandoned her. Her lawyer was packing his things. She was completely alone. Kennedy delivered his final blow with the quiet, devastating tone of a man who had seen far too much. "Sugar, you've been preaching water while drinking wine for so long, you've forgotten what honesty even tastes like. But worse than that, you forgot that public service means serving the public, not serving them up for slaughter." He turned to leave, but then he paused. "Oh, one more thing. The FBI is waiting for you outside. Turns out, campaign finance fraud is a federal crime. So is inciting violence. And so is a lot of what we discussed here today." As if on cue, federal agents walked right into the committee room. AOC's sobs turned into screams as they began reading her rights. Kennedy walked out slowly, his steps deliberate and measured. In the hallway, reporters swarmed him, but he simply waved them off. "No comment," he said. "The evidence speaks for itself." As he passed the viewing gallery, a young woman reached out and grabbed his hand. She was crying. "Thank you," she whispered. "My brother. He was one of those 847 names." "Thank you for making her face what she did." Kennedy patted her hand gently. "Justice isn't always pretty, dear, but it's always necessary." Within just minutes, the great unmasking was trending worldwide. The footage of AOC's complete breakdown, hyperventilating, makeup running down her face, being read her rights, became the most watched political video in history. On CNN, a visibly shaken Anderson Cooper announced, "What we've just witnessed is the complete and utter destruction of a political icon." The evidence presented by Senator Kennedy is simply overwhelming. Even MSNBC couldn't find a way to spin it. Rachel Maddow opened her show in tears. "I believed in her," she said. "We all did. How did we not see this?" But it was the reaction from AOC's own district that truly showed the impact. In Queens, people actually took to the streets, not to protest her arrest, but to celebrate it. Maria Santos, the single mother who couldn't get help while AOC was wearing designer dresses, stood outside the courthouse with hundreds of others. "She fooled us," she cried, "made us believe she was one of us while she got rich off our pain." The Democratic Party immediately went into crisis mode. Chuck Schumer held an emergency press conference. He declared, "Representative Ocasio-Cortez will be expelled from the Democratic caucus, effective immediately. Her actions are antithetical to everything we stand for." The rest of the squad scattered. Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and the others released statements distancing themselves, but it was far too late. The investigations were already spreading. If AOC had been this corrupt, people wondered, what about the others? Young progressives, however, felt the betrayal most deeply. A 22-year-old activist from Brooklyn cried on TikTok. She was supposed to be different. She was supposed to be our voice. Instead, she was just another grifter who saw us as nothing but stepping stones. The environmental movement expelled her overnight. Greta Thunberg tweeted simply, "She stole our cause and sold it for Gucci." Unforgivable. Meanwhile, in Louisiana, Senator Kennedy returned to his small office in Baton Rouge. There were no victory laps, no gloating. When local reporters found him, he was just reading constituent mail, same as any other day. "Senator, how does it feel to have destroyed AOC?" one asked. Kennedy looked up from his desk, his eyes looking sad. "Son, I didn't destroy anyone," he replied. "The truth did that. I just held up a mirror." "Will you run for president?" another reporter chimed in. "You're polling at 84% nationally." Kennedy just chuckled. "I'm 71 years old," he said. "My job is to serve the people of Louisiana. Besides, my wife would kill me if I even tried to move to Washington full-time." But across America, something had truly shifted. The exposure of AOC's corruption had broken a kind of spell. People started looking more closely at all their leaders, asking harder questions, and demanding real answers. In barbershops and beauty salons, in churches and community centers, the conversation was the same. If she fooled us, that completely, who else is lying to us? 3 weeks later, AOC was formally charged with 47 federal crimes, ranging from wire fraud and money laundering to conspiracy. Her trial was set for the following spring. Legal experts predicted she would face anywhere from 25 years to life in prison. Her expensive lawyers tried to negotiate a plea deal, but prosecutors had 200 hours of evidence, thanks to Kennedy's methodical preparation. There was simply nowhere left to run. Her apartment in D.C. was seized. The designer clothes were auctioned off, and the book deals were canceled. The woman who had entered Congress with just $15,000 in her name would leave it with nothing but a prison number. But the true legacy lay in the 847 names Kennedy read aloud. Their families at last received the acknowledgement they deserved. Their deaths were no longer just statistics. They were seen as preventable tragedies, born from unchecked political ambition. A foundation was established in their memory, funded with the assets seized from AOC's corruption. It aimed to offer mental health services, addiction treatment, and support for crime victims in the very communities she had neglected. From her jail cell while awaiting trial, AOC granted a single interview. Looking disheveled, without makeup, and trading her designer clothes for an orange jumpsuit, she was asked what she had learned. "I lost myself," she admitted quietly. "I started to believe my own lies. I began to think I was above the very people I claimed to serve." "Do you have any words for Senator Kennedy?" There was a long pause. "He did what I should have done. He told the truth." Meanwhile, back in Louisiana, Kennedy was relaxing on his porch, sipping a glass of sweet tea. His wife asked him if he had any regrets about the hearing. "No, Cher," he said softly. "Sometimes you have to clean house even when it gets ugly. Especially when it's ugly." As the sun began to set over the bayou, Kennedy's phone started ringing. It was President Trump. "Hell of a job, John. We need more people like you in Washington." "Thank you, Mr. President. But I think Washington needs fewer people, not more. Maybe that's the real lesson in all this." He hung up the phone and went back to his tea. Tomorrow, he would be right back in his office, serving his constituents, reading their letters and solving their problems. The work of a real democracy, after all, never truly ends. Back in Queens, at the very food bank AOC had once ignored, a new sign went up in memory of the 847. "Never forget, never again." And in 1,000 small ways across a wounded but healing nation, Americans were reminded of what their government was meant to be, of the people, by the people. For the people, not for Instagram, not for book deals, not for champagne socialists in designer clothes, for the people. The gentleman from Louisiana had reminded them of that, and it was a lesson they wouldn't forget again. The truth, you see, doesn't need a filter. It doesn't need a brand. It doesn't need likes, shares, or viral moments. It just needs someone brave enough to tell it.